Welcome to the Net Zero Plan Evaluation Workshop, hosted by Work on Climate and presented by Diego Espinosa, CEO and founder of Voiz Academy. I'm Valerie Vidala, a volunteer at Work on Climate, and I'm thrilled to be facilitating today's session. My colleague, Jess Ledoux, organized this event and is here providing tech support, along with another Work on Climate volunteer, Lyubov Izakova. From Voiz Academy, we will be receiving breakout room support from Ben Hillier, Ben Richmond, and Alekia Vasantavada, and as well as Anita Kalava, who also hosts Voiz Academy Climate Careers podcast. This event is being recorded and we'll share it on YouTube, our YouTube channel and website once it's available. So we've got a packed agenda today. I'm going to give you a very quick run through of how it's going to go. Diego will present for about 20 minutes, after which we're going to have breakout rooms for approximately 40 minutes. Upon returning from the breakout rooms, we'll have a discussion about your conversations that you had in the breakout rooms. For those of you who are new to Work on Climate, I'd love to tell you just a little bit about it. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to make climate work mainstream. With over 29,000 members, we organize events like this one to help professionals transition into climate-related careers. This particular event is being sponsored by the Learn Workplace Climate Action channel, which is in the Work on Climate Slack community. The channel was recently created for members who want to share resources, ask questions, and have discussions about climate action and sustainability in the workplace. Since you're attending this particular event, we'd love for you to join the channel and participate in the conversation. You can find more about joining our community and the Learn Workplace Climate Action channel by visiting our website at workonclimate.org. Now, I'm happy to introduce Diego Espinosa, CEO and co-founder of Voiz Academy, which is a climate-focused educational platform dedicated to equipping individuals with the skills and knowledge necessary for careers in sustainability, climate action, and ESG roles. Take it away, Diego.
Okay, thanks, Valerie, and thanks, Jess, for all your work in organizing this initiative. Really happy to be participating in this joint event with Work on Climate. Just a little bit about Voiz Academy. And by the way, I was supposed to be featuring these slides as Valerie talked, and I didn't do my job, so apologies, Valerie. So I'll just fast forward to mine. So a little bit about Voiz Academy. We're an upskilling and career coaching platform for climate and sustainability. We've been around several years. Thousands of people have come to our programs. This Net Zero Plan workshop is something that relates to three of our programs, which are Climate Consultant, Decarbonization Analyst, and Climate Disclosure Analyst. So these are our
Antenna, can you share your screen?
Yes.
Sorry, and by the way, please mute if you're joining the meeting. So yes, and so we're here. I'm here today with 4 coaches from Voiz Academy, and they'll be facilitating the breakout rooms, and also Anita Kalava, who runs our podcast. So just a little bit about me. I'm going to go through this presentation quickly, but I just wanted to let you know, my story is I've pivoted like 3 or 4 times in my career. I've been an investor, institutional investor. I've been a tech entrepreneur in the blockchain space. I've gone through accelerators. I've been a business school professor and a consultant at BCG. And I have an MBA in finance from Wharton. And all of those things basically mean that I've done, like you, tons of different things. And I'm trying to figure out how to bring all of that into climate. And so in my case, decided to do a startup in order to achieve that. But I really empathize with everybody who has an interest in working on climate and figuring out how to apply all their skills to make that happen. So that's basically what I'm all about. So today is a workshop, an interactive workshop. And when I say interactive, we're going to go into breakout rooms. Please, please, please turn your cameras on when you're in these breakout rooms. It really just creates a sense of community and helps with the participation. And so it's evaluating net zero plans from a CSRD perspective, and I'm going to go into what that means a little bit in a second. So not to get ahead of myself here. Okay. Obviously a big week, big event, and that we're all, grappling with the implications of in terms of the election in the United States, even though this is probably a global group that matters to everyone. And so people are questioning, like, what does this mean for climate careers? What does it mean for achieving climate goals? All of those things, totally valid to be thinking about that today of all days. So here's 3 reasons just to jump in. for why net zero still matters, right? Number one, corporate stakeholders haven't changed. I spoke this morning to somebody in China who is actually from India, and they had a fashion apparel company that was in the supply chain of major apparel firms in the US, wanting to come into our programs because they want to be a more sustainable supply chain. Okay, we're having that conversation today, even despite what happened yesterday, right? And so on Tuesday, and so this is basically like a global a supply chain of corporations. The customers of corporations, the investors in corporations, still have societal pressure to be sustainable, and I don't think that's changed. Number two, these are global dynamics at work. Today we're going to be talking about CSRD. In Mexico, we have a president who is a woman and a PhD physicist who is author of the IPCC report, right? So there's all kinds of things going on all over the world, and I think that are very positive, and I think reasons for why net zero is still a goal that we need to get to, and we're going to get to. The green transition is less policy dependent than it used to be. What do I mean by that? You know, there's leaps. I read today that Pakistan is the 6th country in the world for deploying solar panels. Just never thought that, never imagined it, right? Like, why are these things happening? And it's because the economics of green technologies are tipping the balance so that now that they can be deployed without necessarily so much policy intervention. So all 3 reasons to pay attention to net zero. And why do we need net zero? Probably don't need to mention this, but basically we are rapidly increasing our carbon dioxide emissions to about 8 gigatons of carbon per year. We need to bring this down to 0 in terms of the emissions. This is why we call it net zero, right? So think about how Herculean this task is for the human species. This chart goes back, to the kind of late 1800s where we've been doing this. And now all of a sudden we've got to take it down to 0 in a very short number of years. And so what this shows are different variations of this chart is a pathway to net zero emissions. Now we have carbon dioxide on the vertical axis, so up to 40 billion tons, gigatons. And so we're starting out there, and we have to drag the emissions down to 0 to right around 2050 to stay below 1.5 degrees, which is what the IPCC says will still allow us to not do permanent damage to the climate of the globe. And so net zero emissions by 2050, roughly 45% reduction by 2030 are science-based targets that we have to stay below, to not create irreparable damage. Have we already created irreparable damage? It's possible, right? Because we've seen so much evidence of that in the last couple of years. I was in Valencia last year for 3 months, just unimaginable what just happened there. And so this is obviously an imperative for us to accomplish as a species, and corporations are the way that we organize our economic activity. So 8 billion people on the planet cannot get this done. There's no possible way unless corporations, which are the economic organization by which we produce most of our products and emit most of our carbon, unless they are leading the charge in some way. So net zero is very much a corporate function. So what I want to talk a little bit about CSRD, which is the European climate regulation that is going into effect starting from a disclosure standpoint next year. Why is it so important? Again, because today of all days, we need to focus on what's real and what's not going to change, right? The European Union is requiring companies to comply with this really important, broad, far-reaching regulation. And so I don't want to get into the too much specifics of the regulation, because we'll get lost in the acronyms and everything else. What I want you to get from this workshop is a sense of what we're talking about here, so that you intuitively understand what this regulation is all about. Okay, for me, what's important about regulations as we swim in the alphabet soup is to have a real intuitive understanding, so that it's not about looking something up, but we really understand the spirit and what's trying to be accomplished. So the spirit of this regulation, the principles behind it, are that climate is a key business issue, right? So think of this as regulating corporations, okay? And so for corporations, climate is a key business issue, not going to go away, super important, right? So therefore, because it's so important, all of the stakeholders of a corporation, the suppliers, the investors, the customers, the employees, need transparency on what corporations are doing about climate, right? And the management of climate within a company. And there's this thing called a materiality focus. So what does that mean? Materiality focus means like, if it's important, you better be telling us, right? If it's important, you better be disclosing it to these stakeholders. And then fourthly, there's a stakeholder lens that's used. So in other words, the lens that corporations should be thinking about as they have initiatives and do disclosure and all these things is like, does this meet the stakeholders' needs? It can't just be like abstract. They have to be thinking about the stakeholders. So that's really kind of special in a sense, right? Because if you think about it, corporations can be kind of like distanced from the stakeholders that they serve or are involved with. But here, this is trying to close that distance and essentially say, no, you're not allowed to just treat this in the abstract. You really got to be thinking about, like, in an almost empathetic way. What do stakeholders want to see? What do they want us to do? And so that's a really important part of this equation. So when I talk about materiality, there's this concept of double materiality, and it means across the whole value chain of a corporation. That means not just within the four walls of the operations and the assets that they own, but upstream in terms of the suppliers and downstream in terms of consumers and post-use in terms of disposal of a product. Companies need to be thinking about the risks and opportunities to the firm that climate poses. So stranded assets and things that are going to be affected directly by climate, like agriculture or operations that might be flooded, things like that, which, these days is a super important topic. So think of this as how climate impacts the company, right? And then also how the company is impacting the planet and people, and specifically climate. So this dual materiality means tell us what's important about how climate is impacting you, and tell us what's important about how you are impacting the climate, right? And so it's a really kind of like intuitively easy way of thinking about this. Okay, so I'm going to introduce a really important concept in net zero, which is the net zero waterfall chart. And as you go through the net zero plans, I want you to keep this chart in mind, which is that we have a carbon footprint into this chart's dated back 2022. Ignore that. So we have a carbon footprint on day one. And then we have the growth. If we didn't do anything, how much growth in carbon emissions would we have all the way to 2050, right? And so that's the amount of emissions that we need to get rid of. And so then we're going to set a target. So let's say the target is, okay, by 2050, we're going to be at zero in compliance with the overall IPCC targets. We're going to be at zero carbon emissions, right? And so we need to reduce from that level. So how are we going to reduce our emissions, our annual emissions? And it's basically using renewable power like solar, wind, and that's going to take a chunk out of it. And that might be that our suppliers use it, or it might be distributed. We're going to do decarbonization initiatives within the company, so make things more circular or reduce waste, all those kinds of initiatives. Introduce more efficient energy sources or machines like heat pumps, for instance. Thirdly, forest and soil conservation, aka offsets. They get a bad name, but there is a place for offsets if they're done right. How do we know if they're done right? These are big questions, and they can't be overused. But offsets are basically companies promoting forest and soil conservation so that more carbon can be taken out of the air to offset the carbon that they're still putting into the air, right? And then finally, removal. At some point, the technology for removal might work where we get carbon directly out of the air. And so that can be in a net zero plan. So the idea behind this waterfall chart is that we set a target, that we make sure that we have a good carbon calculation, and that we rigorously think through all of these options, all of these initiatives for getting rid of the emissions and getting to the target by the end of the day. So keep this waterfall chart in mind as you go through. So corporate net zero basically means, and this again is not going to change, I don't think, with the election, that we have thousands and thousands of companies that say they're taking action, and 2,000 to 3,000 of them, because it's changing all the time, are using science-based targets. The Science-Based Target Initiative means setting a target that is in line with the IPCC goals of 1.5 degrees. And so that's a lot of companies that are setting science-based targets. And it's a reason why there's still jobs in this space, and there's still a very big need to have professionals involved in this net zero initiative. So just a word about scopes 1, 2, and 3. If you're not familiar with this. So a big obstacle is that the four walls of a company, globally speaking, right, involve using energy within those four walls, and that's scope 1. buying energy from producers, from power suppliers is scope 2 for those 4 walls. But then there's everything that's happening in other companies that supply us, that's scope 3. And then downstream, this is an example of apparel. There's scope 3 downstream, which is the customers and the post-use. So a big difficulty here is firms they just can't get away with managing what's happening in their 4 walls. They have to look upstream and they have to look downstream. And this is what CSRD says. You need to have a value chain focus and tell us what's important, what's material. So what's in a net zero plan that you're going to see? There's going to be a carbon footprint calculation and a target. There's going to be information about how they're switching to renewables. There's going to be information about how they're decarbonizing operations. And then finally, how they're fostering conservation and renewables to get to net zero. So in a sense, companies are basically one way or another telling you the information that's on this chart. Okay. What we're going to do is evaluate that net zero plan, those net zero plans from a CSRD perspective. What does that mean? Are the targets clear and rigorous, right? Because targets are a big part of CSRD. Are the carbon calculations clear and rigorous? Do they identify material risk? Do the initiatives that they're talking about, the decarbonization, the renewables, the offsets, do they address double materiality, the risks to the company and the risks of the company to climate? And then does the whole governance make sense? The integration with strategy and the organization and so forth. So these are the 4 categories. Now, I want to say, this can seem a little complex, but I just want to tell you one thing, which is that the aim of this workshop is to time box something and just say, open a window and look inside. And just take an initial view of a net zero plan from this perspective: targets, carbon calculation, initiatives, and governance. Targets, carbon calculations, initiatives, and governance. And just be thinking about in your mind as you look through the net zero plans, is what you're reading, does it make sense? Are they addressing double materiality? These are the big questions that firms have to introduce when they talk about net zero within the plan. So don't expect your work to be perfect. Just dive in and really start doing this, and it'll give you a really sense of what these plans are about, and also give you a sense of what CSRD is trying to accomplish in Europe. So two birds that we're trying to reach, and I think both of those could be done in the time frame that we've been talking about. So now I'm going to stop, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben Hillier, who's our head of ops at Voiz Academy, and he's going to give you a little bit more detailed instructions about what to do in the breakout rooms.